Wait there. All right, get out of the way, friend. Friend, yeah,
Hi, Marvin. Good to see you.
Request everybody to please get seated as we are preparing for the next session. Thank you.
सर डॉक्टर मोहम्मद अली पंजाब यूनिवर्सिटी में ज्वाइन कर चुके हैं, लेकिन उससे पहले उन्होंने ये किया था।
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and a very good afternoon to our panelists, speakers, distinguished audience. I, Hanan Hussain, on behalf of the Institute of Regional Studies, warmly welcome you all to our third session today, which is on U.S. policy towards South Asia under Trump 2.0. This session will feature a series of panelists, both in person as well as virtual, and we look forward to an informed discussion. And before I proceed further, I pass it on to President IRS, Ambassador George Salim, who will be chairing this session to give his remarks. So,
Thank you. I'll be rather moderating the session. Our chair and keynote speaker will be Ambassador Giri Labas Jilani, former Foreign Minister and former Foreign Secretary, and the former ambassador to the US. So distinguished guests, ambassadors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the most important sessions we would be having. There are 3 days of regional dialogue. And I think it requires even greater importance in the current scenario of escalation between Pakistan and India because of the provocation, the great provocation and the unreasonable attitude we are witnessing. You'd all know that the Trump administration has taken over in the US. This is the second term of President Trump. And this time, unlike the first term, he got a popular majority. Also, he is much more experienced now. Last time when he was president, he was more of a novice politically. This time, it's been already 8 years, 4 years as president and 4 years as the leader of the Republican Party, having mounted a very successful comeback campaign, a unique feature in the US politics. Now, Trump's coming back to power, or Trump 2.0, as we have seen, has already caused a great deal of changes in the US foreign policy perspective. And that is not limited to just South Asia, whether we talk about Europe, whether we talk about economic issues, whether we talk about climate change issues, or whether we talk about US involvement in other regions in terms of preventative diplomacy, in terms of conflict resolution or management. Every aspect of US foreign policy has been affected by Trump's coming back to power. Now, today we want to examine what impact it would have on the US foreign policy for our region. As a backdrop, I may just reiterate the obvious. That is that US-Pakistan relations are not at the same level of activity or sort of, like economic and defense cooperation that they used to be a couple of decades ago. US relations with India, on the other hand, have strengthened to the point where India is seen as a strategic partner by the US, and where India is a very important part of the so-called US policy of containment of China, termed as the Indo-Pacific strategy, which is a misnomer, but that's how they define it. So that is there. But what we also witnessed was that as President Trump took over, his priority was not initially South Asia, and understandably so. There's a conflict in Europe, in Ukraine, sort of, like conflict which has lasted many years and is seen as an existentialist challenge by many European countries. Then a major conflict in the Middle East, which had the attention of all the communities of the world, I could say. Despite that, we saw that Prime Minister Modi was one of the fewer leaders who were invited to Washington in the very first days of Trump presidency, or the very inception of it. And the joint statement issued by after that represented that President Trump would sustain the momentum of cooperation that has been ongoing between the US and India for the last some years. We intend to have this session serve as a platform for these eminent policymakers and experts that we have gathered, some with great experience as practitioners, such as Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani Saab and Ambassador Naqvi. Ambassador Jilani Saab, of course, was, like I've already mentioned, Prime Minister and Ambassador to the US, Foreign Secretary. Ambassador Naqvi has been dealing with the US in the Foreign Office for many years, and now is heading a very prestigious think tank. Besides that, we will be joined by some very eminent speakers virtually. Ambassador Ijaz Chaudhry Saab, former Foreign Secretary, and also former Ambassador of Pakistan to the US. Then we would have we would have Dr. Hassan Abbas, we would have Michael Kugelman. So, these are the names do not need much introduction in terms of their relevance to the subject. So we'd start with sort of, a couple of online speakers, the virtual, those who are joining us virtually, because as you know, we are running about an hour behind schedule because of the fact that the sessions in the morning, they lasted much longer than expected. Because of the time difference, and the fact that the virtual speakers have been waiting for quite some time. We'll start with them, and then I will invite our keynote speaker and the chair of the session, Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani, to speak, and then Ambassador Naqvi. So we'll start with Dr. Marvin. Dr. Rizwan, can you check his there? Okay. So Dr. Marvin Weinbaum, the floor is yours, please. He needs to unmute.
Marvin, we can't hear you.
Yes, I found it now. Yes, so would you like me to begin then?
Yes, please, Dr. Marvin.
Okay. In the 105 days that the Trump administration has been in office, we've had an opportunity to gain reasonably good picture of what to expect from American foreign policy for the next 4 years. Above all, it features hyper-nationalism. It carries with it economic warfare, a radical reset of many long-standing bilateral and multilateral political relationships, and a determination to defy international conventions. In just a short time, the new administration has also managed to alter the image of the United States, which had prided itself on being a champion of humanitarian causes, human rights, and democratic institutions and processes. Much of what has become American foreign policy finds reflection in South Asia. Not all of it has brought with it a break with the past. There are major areas of continuity with previous administrations. Basically unchanged is Pakistan's diminished strategic importance to the United States and the tilt towards India that became more pronounced during the Biden administration. Remaining as well is the tendency to see Pakistan through a China lens. Continuity also exists in the near total US political engagement from Afghanistan, and counterterrorism remains the prime motivating factor for sustaining an American interest in the region. Other policy areas are likely to remain unchanged. For example, the reluctance of Washington to be drawn into domestic political squabbles or getting directly involved in the region's bilateral disputes. But the policy disruptions that have been wrought by the Trump administration are striking. The withdrawal of US development and humanitarian assistance programs have created new economic burdens for countries across South Asia, most acutely Afghanistan. US immigration policy has erected new barriers and created severe hardships. Washington's trade policies will force deep tariff and non-tariff concessions for allegedly having ripped off the US. The closure of VOA, Radio Liberty, and other media platforms has severed a vital connection between the US and the peoples of South Asia. There'll be less tolerance of countries' efforts to balance their foreign policies between the US and China. As elsewhere, the US is measuring its relationship with the region by its contribution to making America great again. Ironically, much of what the administration has done already has only served to lower the US standing in the eyes of much of the world. Whether we examine the continuity of US policy or the new initiatives in South Asia, there exists within the Trump administration a lack of planning and absence of overriding strategy in the setting and execution of policy, whereby loyalty trumps expertise. Unresolved is whether to adhere to a traditional Republican internationalism or nativist isolationism. There is a cross-cut here in the clash between Trump-defined MAGNA, Make America Great Again, notions which emphasize deal-making, and old-line Republican policy that is more inclined to use military threats. On top of all of this is the unpredictability of a foreign policy that is subject to the whims of a president readily capable of rapidly changing direction. So finally, South Asia, like much of the globe, is on the receiving end of a mercurial, disruptive U.S. foreign policy. Thank you.
I think it's frozen. Can the technicians look into it?
I think he has finished his remarks.
Well, thanks a lot, Dr. Marvin, for your very insightful remarks. We would next request Ambassador Azaz Chaudhry, former Foreign Secretary and Ambassador to the US.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Johar and the Institute of Regional Studies for putting together this very important discussion. I would swing back a little, very briefly, to how the United States started viewing South Asia in the early part of our life as an independent country. And at that time, Pakistan became a partner of choice in US's competition with the Soviet Union, the Cold War. Then came 9/11, and we saw that India used that time as an opening to the West to project itself as a fellow victim of what President Bush called Islamist terrorism. And with Pakistan, US started having second thoughts for not, in its own view, not doing enough to help US win the war against terrorism or war in Afghanistan. Then came the third phase of this relationship of the US with the South Asia, with the first term of US of Donald Trump's presidency, when in 2017, it rearranged its national security policies and decided that major power strategic competition with China and Russia would now be the top priority for the United States. This time, India became a partner of choice in the US competition with China. And over time, Pakistan lost its relevance, particularly after the US exit from Afghanistan. Under Biden administration, we saw no contact with Pakistan of any significance. But under Donald Trump's second presidency, we see some contacts being made, although the strategic picture has not changed. India still remains a preferred partner for the US. Although India is now looking, or at least exhibiting, for more strategic autonomy in order to maintain its relations with Russia and its economic relations with China. India is also reluctant to call itself as an ally of the US, but believe it is a partnership. With Pakistan, the perception in the US is, and maybe my American colleagues here would correct me, the perception already in the US is that Pakistan is a partner of China, a strategic partner of China, which I think they are not wrong. And that Pakistan is not relevant anymore for the US strategic calculus. I think this thinking is also beginning to change a little as we see that President Trump's second term wishes to open more sort of links with Pakistan. Perhaps, probably, in order for not to push Pakistan towards the China camp completely, or to benefit from the economic opportunities that Pakistan might offer, especially in the mineral sector. Well, this relationship between the two governments has become quite limited in Pakistan's case. The people-to-people contacts have somehow remained steady, from education and health to information technology and agriculture. But even that is now under threat for the first time because of the immigration policies, the restrictive immigration policies that the Trump administration intends to follow. So the picture that appears to me is that for Pakistan, China will remain an important strategic partner, but there remains an inclination within the Pakistani policymakers not to lose the US as a potential friend, as a country with which we have had sustained periods of engagement, which is a large trading partner, and with which we have had strong people-to-people ties. In the context of the present tensions between Pakistan and India, the United States assumes a very special place, as it had played a similar role in the past as well. I think the United States has taken an objective position at this time because of the lack of evidence, because of the inability of India to provide any evidence or even any shred of investigation for reaching a conclusion that the terrorist incident in Pahalgam, which is a very bad incident, one must condemn, everybody condemns it, was a handiwork of Pakistan. I think India has jumped to the conclusion, and in turn, it has exposed its own self to criticism in Pakistan very widely, but also elsewhere, that perhaps it's not just India, but it is Pakistan which is a victim of terrorism from India. So all incidents from Chitty Singh Pura down to Pahalgam have opened up, and we find that there were question marks on nearly every allegation that India has been making. Vice President J.D. Vance was there, but as you must have seen, he refused to align with the US allegation. So it's not that they are favoring Pakistan, not at all. It's just that India's narrative is not credible this time. So the United States is in a unique position to effect some restraint on the rather provocative behavior and conduct that Indian leadership and its media have carried forward. So once again, the regional peace and stability has reached a stage where the United States has a very critical role, and we do hope that it will play that role. I would also like to mention here that there's enormous work that Pakistan has done to stop terror finance, to apprehend, prosecute terrorist entities which were the legacy of, the war on terror, or before that, Afghan Jihad, and the Financial Action Task Force teams, the monitoring teams for the 1373 committee have all attested to the immense good work that Pakistan has done. And I think India is not recognizing all that work and continues to try to isolate Pakistan, and now they have gone to the ultimate steps of suspending the flow of Pakistani waters. And that would be, if they do so, they have suspended the treaty, but if they stop the water, I think that would be an act of war. So this time, I think the United States has a very onerous responsibility to play a role in bringing and restoring peace and stability to South Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Azaz Chaudhry Saab, for a very valuable contribution. Now, it's very interesting. We're going to zigzag. We had the US perspective in terms of an academic from the University of Illinois, and then also worked at the State Department as an analyst. And then, of course, we had the perspective of a Pakistani top diplomat. And it's very interesting to see how the sort of, the contrast in terms of the perspectives, the views, naturally based on sort of, how we see it from a Pakistani point of view, Pakistani interests and the US interests, naturally, the analysts from there, the experts from there would present the US interests and US perspective as well. So I think that would be very important for our discussion. I would now go back to the US again. I would invite this time Michael Kugelman, whom you all know, I'm sure, not only that he's the director of South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center, but also he's authored 11 books, and he's written for the New York Times, Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, and many other publications. And I've always found his comments on this subject very Mr. Kugelman, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. And let me just say that I speak today in my own private capacity as an analyst of South Asia. So I'll just speak very briefly with a three-step or three-comment intervention. The first one, I'll speak very briefly about US policy in South Asia as I see it in Trump 2.0. I'll then talk about how I see US-Pakistan relations during the second Trump administration, and then conclude with a comment on the US posture in this current India-Pakistan crisis. So in terms of US policy in South Asia in this Trump 2.0, South Asia, I mean, to be very candid, South Asia will not be a core area of US strategic focus. And I've actually noticed that the term South Asia itself is not used all that much in Washington anymore on official levels. It appears to have been supplanted by the term Indo-Pacific, of which South Asia is understood to be a part. But oftentimes, though there is a bit of ambiguity in this, Afghanistan and Pakistan are not assumed to be a part of that Indo-Pacific. The main focus of the administration for the first year of its power, geographically speaking, will be closer to home, the Western Hemisphere, as well as focusing on trying to do what's possible to end the wars in the Middle East and Ukraine. East Asia, I think, will continue to be a point of concern. But I think that South Asia, less so, at least initially. And I think that when the administration looks at South Asia, its position or its policy will be shaped through two lenses, one being trade, one being geopolitics and great power competition. In terms of trade, this administration would like to see the region, as it would like to see all regions in the world, buying more from America. The US is a top destination for exports from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. So essentially half the SAARC region looks to the US as a top export destination. But the US will want the region to buy more products. And we've seen how this has already become a bit of a tricky issue with the Trump administration's tariff policy. The four countries that I mentioned before were all hit with reciprocal tariffs in addition to the 10% baseline tariff. And of course, the reciprocal tariffs have now been paused. That'll continue for some more weeks. But clearly, this has put those four countries I mentioned, and particularly Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, in a bit of a difficult spot as they mobilize to try to pursue an arrangement with the Trump administration that would enable those tariffs to not snap back, because you're looking at some pretty vulnerable economies and could be impacted significantly if those reciprocal tariffs were to snap back. In terms of the great power competition lens, this has already been mentioned before. I do think that the Trump administration will look to find ways to build incentives in the region for countries to do less business with China. And clearly, that's a much easier task in some countries than it is in others. Shifting to my view on the US-Pakistan relationship in Trump 2.0, I would argue that Pakistan has done a pretty good job of appealing to the U.S. with an appropriate pitch. It's done a good job of getting the U.S.'s attention. I mean, many analysts, including myself, thought that this administration would really not be looking at Pakistan that closely, at least early in its term. That is true in a broad sense, but if you look at the fact that there are a series of areas where I think Pakistan has been able to effectively hit on some key areas of focus from the administration in its individual pitch. So, for example, we know that critical minerals is something that the Trump administration is very interested in so many places. And we've seen Islamabad really intensify that pitch, which is not a new one, but the fact that there was a global mineral forum several weeks ago, and of course there was a senior U.S. government presence there. And this is real. I mean, here in Washington, I know that the administration is very interested in exploring investment opportunities in critical minerals in Pakistan. Buying America, I think it's significant that Pakistan some weeks ago removed some import bans that had on some key American products, particularly soybeans, which is one of the top Pakistani imports from the U.S. I think that's significant. Crypto, we know that the Trump administration is interested in crypto, and Islamabad recently set up a crypto council chaired by the finance minister, as I understand it. And then finally, counterterrorism. Who would have thought that when President Trump gave his joint address to Congress earlier this year, that the one country that he would publicly thank and praise would be Pakistan? And that's, of course, for the cooperation between the two to apprehend an ISK terrorist involved in the Abbey Gate attack in Kabul several years ago. So that's a good thing. But I would actually argue that those very areas that Pakistan has pitched effectively to the U.S. are unlikely to become pillars of cooperation. I just think it's quite frankly not very realistic. Critical minerals may sound good, but as I see it, many of them, if not most of them, are in the two provinces most hard hit by terrorism, where you have the most significant security concerns, Baluchistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Crypto, as I see it, is very much a work in progress. I don't really see the administration pursuing things there that much in Pakistan. And in terms of trade, yes, I mean, we know that the U.S. and Pakistan have a pretty notable trade relationship, but the volume of trade is still relatively small. And finally, on the counterterrorism front, there's a mismatch in priorities in the sense that the U.S. is much more focused on Islamic State Khorasan, much more concerned about it, whereas Pakistan is, of course, much more concerned about Tehrik-i-Taliban, TTP. So what should be focused on, very briefly? Counterterrorism, despite what I said, it can work in this relationship as long as it's understood to be limited. So I think that there might be opportunities for intelligence sharing on terror groups that threaten both countries. And of course, that would entail ISK, but not necessarily discounting the possibility of TTP. It's notable that the latest National Intelligence Council report, which came out some weeks ago, it mentioned TTP as a potential future threat to the U.S., which suggests that the U.S. might be inclined to talk to Pakistan about that a bit. I believe the next round of the U.S.-Pakistan counterterrorism dialogue is scheduled to happen in June. I will say that we should see how this might be impacted by the India-Pakistan crisis. India might urge the U.S. to do less security cooperation with Pakistan, given how things have played out in recent weeks. U.S.-China competition can be an opportunity, not an obstacle for U.S.-Pakistan relations. My sense is that CPEC has lost a lot of its momentum, so there might be an opportunity for the U.S. to move in and to explore investment, ideally through the Development Finance Corporation, which is a U.S. entity that sponsors investment infrastructure, but their security would be an issue. Multilateral cooperation is another area where I think this administration might be keen to work with Pakistan to the extent possible. Multilateralism is not a term that we often associate with the Trump administration, but so long as there's sufficient burden sharing, I think it would be open to that. And here, if you look to Central Asia, a region where Pakistan has a number of good relations, you have critical minerals there. The US has looked into exploring cooperation with Pakistan and Central Asia in the past, whether you're talking about the Tapi pipeline, and more recently, a short-lived and completely forgotten new Quad, one that was concluded just before the Taliban retook power in 2021. I'm sure that you all remember this. It was a Quad that involved the US, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Uzbekistan. Finally, people-to-people ties. I mean, the diaspora here in the US is critical. It's, of course, become quite politicized in recent years, which has made it a bit awkward. But if you can look beyond that, you have many Pakistani Americans working in sectors like tech and clean energy that could potentially be high growth sectors in Pakistan. So there might be a convergence there. Finally, let me wrap up with just a comment on the U.S. role in the India-Pakistan crisis. We all know that there's a precedent of U.S. intervention to push for de-escalation during these crises in the past. There are two things that we know right now. One is that this administration values partnership with India and sympathizes with its concerns about terrorism. The second thing we know is that it does not want a war. It does not want a subcontinental war. Why? Several reasons. It doesn't serve U.S. interests. That's always the case. But also in terms of today, the world is on fire. The administration doesn't want another war. And it also does not want India and Pakistan to be distracted from working with the US on issues important for Washington, countering China in the case of India, and tracking down terrorists that threaten the US in the case of Pakistan. So the US position has vacillated. First, there were some very strong expressions of support and solidarity for India. Then there were calls at the State Department for de-escalation. And of course, Secretary Rubio spoke with both of his counterparts in India and in Pakistan. But I think that the vice president's comments on Fox News the other day are the most useful and concise articulation. Vice President Vance essentially said that the U.S. hopes that any Indian response will not lead to a regional war. The way I read this, the U.S. is acknowledging India's desire to respond, and it acknowledges that India would see this as a counterterrorism imperative, but the U.S. does not want escalation. So the hope is that if India does respond, escalation would be limited. U.S. mediation or attempted mediation is a possibility if the crisis were to escalate into a military one. As I said earlier, there is that precedent. The Trump administration has sought to project itself as a peace broker, and it would not want any more escalation. As I noted, it does not want a war. So with that, I will turn back to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. For a very comprehensive overview built into a very succinct speech, as always. Very much appreciated. Stay with us. I would now go back to, or come back to the Pakistan perspective again. This time, a former Pakistan ambassador to the US, who's also ambassador to China and ambassador, High Commissioner to India as well, was going to be in person, but because of a surgery that he had to do, and he has not recovered from that yet, what he has done is Ambassador Ashraf Jahangir Qazi, of course, he has sent his comments for the occasion, and he actually took a lot of time yesterday trying to prepare that. So I will have Hanan come here and read those comments. Hanan.
Thank you, President. As the U.S. has accorded India non-NATO ally status, it has signed at least 4 defense framework agreements with India relating to military and strategic cooperation. While the Pakistani American community has developed a degree of influence, especially in the 7 swing states of the U.S., its political community largely comprises medical doctors and has relatively little representation and influence in the political, economic, science and technology, academic, literary, cultural, and other aspects of American life. Moreover, the Indian American community has integrated into American society to a greater extent and does not replicate the politics of their original country to the extent that the Pakistani American community does. Many of the current or until recently perceived adversaries of the US belong to the Muslim world. This has found expression in widespread Islamophobia in the US and other Western countries. Most Muslim societies are also seen to be non-democratic, in contrast to the self-image of the US as a citadel of democracy, however illusory that might actually be. During much of the Cold War, Pakistan's foreign policy was afflicted with pro-American pactitis, and it considered itself the most allied ally of the US, as a result of which the US was by far the largest provider of economic and military assistance to Pakistan. Nevertheless, the relationship between the two countries was always more government to government as opposed to people. Despite India being non-aligned and strategically closer to the Soviet Union than the US, its image as the world's largest democracy appealed to the US self-image as the world's first and oldest democracy. Lord Buddha and Mahatma Gandhi were revered as among the greatest of human beings. India was regarded by much of the world in general, and by the US in particular, as a civilizational country that represented a fascinating world of ancient mystery and wisdom, successfully adapting itself to the political demands of modern democratic governance and technological advance. It was in this context that the Sino-Indian border clash became a turning point as the US rushed to the assistance of a crushed India and demanded of Pakistan that it not complicate matters for India in Indian-occupied Kashmir, despite several UN resolutions on the issue calling for a plebiscite. Ever since, the US has demonstrated a complete lack of interest in the human and political rights of the Kashmiri people and has made clear to Pakistan that it could never expect US support for a change in the territorial status quo in Jammu and Kashmir, whatever the legal merits of the issue and the wishes of the Kashmiri people. During the first administration of Trump, the foregoing pattern remained largely in place, except for a further deepening of the bilateral relationship with India, accompanied by severe criticism of Pakistan as an ungrateful and dangerous country. Trump, however, exhibited a personal admiration for Imran Khan, promised him when they met at the White House that he would seek a final solution to the Kashmir dispute. Shortly after, the Indian Prime Minister visited the US, and Trump did not care to raise the Kashmir dispute with him. On the contrary, at a massive rally outside Washington, he summed up the Indo-US relationship with the slogan, "Howdy Modi." When he visited India, he was received by Modi, the butcher of Gujarat, in Ahmedabad, where he was greeted with the slogan, "Trump, Namaskar." In his second administration, Trump is further deepening strategic ties with India, primarily motivated by his policy of globally containing China. Whether expressly articulated or not, he expects Pakistan to prioritize US interests over its own national interests by legalizing the territorial status quo in Jammu and Kashmir, acknowledging India's hegemony in South Asia, stopping all cross-LOC activity against India, recognizing Kashmiri freedom fighters as terrorists, distancing itself from China and CPEC, accepting that India, not Pakistan, is the principal ally of the US in South Asia, which is of course part of the so-called Indo-Pacific region. Since Pakistan's nuclear deterrent is, by its own admission, India-specific, the US, while not insisting, expects Pakistan to agree to its dismantling, even if India does not reciprocate, since its nuclear deterrent is primarily directed against China, which in fact is far from the case. Meanwhile, US longer-term strategic planning for South Asia includes post-Pakistan scenarios. So much for the US commitment to the security and survival of Pakistan. In addition, Trump wishes Pakistan to follow Saudi Arabia's lead as far as Palestine is concerned, and to indicate a willingness to recognize Israel, preferably before Saudi Arabia does so, and in any case, immediately following a Saudi decision to do so. Any reluctance to do any of Trump 2.0's requirements as implied, if not always articulated during its first 100 days, will be regarded as a hostile stance which could carry an existential price for Pakistan. In conclusion, what is to be done? The answers are more or less obvious. But given the priorities of the power, political, economic, and social elites of Pakistan who act in their own interests in the name of the people, and given until recently the passive resignation of the vast majority of the people to their fate, the exploiting and ruling elites are confident that they will escape justice, at least until Mother Nature exacts her doomsday price on all without distinction between the innocent and the guilty. The time available to do what may still be done to avert such a scenario is fast running out, primarily because of leaders like Trump and their cohorts in the US and around the world. Finally, to repeat the obvious, Pakistan necessarily needs to maintain the best possible relationship with an unreliable US while recognizing and acting upon the recognition that its only global power friend is the ever reliable China, with which it needs to build the closest possible bilateral, regional, and strategic relationship. This factor is easily conceded, but it is not consistently acted upon because of reasons that are generally known. As a result, Pakistan is in danger of losing the trust and its truest friend, which is the rising global power, while being betrayed by the declining global power. What a bargain. Thank you.
So as you can see, we want all shades of opinion to be expressed by eminent experts. Now, we go back to Washington, this time to a scholar who is both American and Pakistani. Dr. Hassan Abbas is a distinguished professor of international relations at National Defense University, Washington, D.C. And he understands both the Pakistan perspective and the current US perspectives. So it'll be a very interesting expose from him. I'm looking forward to that very much. Dr. Abbas, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Jawad Salim. I'm truly honored to be part of this very distinguished panel. The wisdom of Marvin Weinbaum, Ambassador Azaz Chaudhry, Ambassador Ashraf, and the clarity of Michael Kugelman, my friend, on about the future and some of the dynamics has made my job much easier. So I'll not repeat any of the things which were very aptly and articulately taken up. And I'll pick up on one major theme, a question which I'll reframe, and I'll go into a little bit of future projection and what really matters. First and foremost, I pose this question. Today, in the present context of President Trump, his second administration, what really drives the relationship at this moment, and where can it go? That's the question I pose. First, very briefly on a broader scale, because a couple of our my esteemed colleagues have taken up a broader international long-term context. All I can add to that is what Marvin Weinbaum had hinted at, that it is still unresolved whether this administration will adhere to the traditional republicanism, their old model, or they might shift a bit towards isolationism. But what is very clear to me is that this administration wants reduction of international conflicts, or to resolve conflicts without going into military means. That's very clear to me, which is very distinct and which has been projected by President Trump and his team very categorically. Second thing, the timeline that this administration is working on is also very quick. Unlike the traditional ways in which you get into a negotiation like JCPOA with US and Iran, or with other cases where bilateral or multilateral agreements start, in this case, you can call it quite transactional. Just look at the Russia-Ukraine conversations and how US is looking at it. And even US-Iran negotiations that are currently going on through Oman and in Rome. Very quick timeline. So that's the new model. That's what this administration, so in case of whether it is India, Pakistan, or on any of the other issues, the relationship building as well, you will see very clear, hard-nosed calculus, short timeline, and very clear statements whether someone likes that or not. That's the new pattern that is emerging, I have been in US now for the 25 years, and as an American of Pakistani descent or Pakistani American, I can tell you I have not seen this kind of timeline in any other administration. Now going to my question of what drives US-Pakistan relationship, and I can share a very short anecdote. This is for a fact I know or have heard from very authentic folks that in end of February, when Pakistan was made aware of this one terrorist who was involved in a major terrorism attack in Afghanistan on 15th, around that 15th August 2021. A call was made from Pakistan by on behalf of the head of the Pakistani intelligence, the military, the ISI intelligence, and they need to talk to the head of the US intelligence. And they were told that he is traveling, and on short notice it is not possible, and this should be processed through the embassy level or through, when they insisted, within one day, it went through three different channels, and when Pakistan insisted, no, the head of the Pakistani intelligence need to talk to the head of the US intelligence. It happened within 24 hours. And I was thinking, how many other countries in this region where the head of intelligence of one country would call, and US in the early days of a new administration, and while the US intelligence chief was, head of CIA was visiting a country for very important conversations or whatever task, but this happened, and direct conversation happened, which led to the whole thing. Which tells me, I'm using this anecdote to make a case, which is that in case of Pakistan, whether this is the ideal relationship spectrum or not, the reality is, which is an old reality, but we are seeing a new face of it. It is going to be a totally security-driven relationship. That's what drives it, which tells me about two things. So one is the CT cooperation, counterterrorism cooperation, that will be on top of the list. Secondly, another issue which is not often talked about or seen as too sensitive or seen as an elephant in the room, but I'll say it up front. Every major conversation in US policy circles about Pakistan is, if there's a 3-minute or even there are 2 points, one is CT, other is nuclear issue. And Pakistan's nuclear capability, Pakistan's nuclear missile system. So these are the two domains in which conversations will take place. Even when we are looking at India, Pakistan, this crisis, this very unfortunate, sad, terrible warmongering scenario that we are seeing in the region, it will also be seen through the lens of what this means for CT cooperation with Pakistan. What is Pakistan's status? If you ask me, if I step back and say, what is the long-term context? Yes, the Pakistani diplomats are saying, and rightly so, by 2050, Pakistan will be the third largest nation. Pakistan has shown that whenever there is little political stability, Pakistan has tremendous capability to grow, to show economic growth. So Pakistan is a very important country. Pakistan's relevance in any international context cannot be underestimated, irrespective of political challenges or somebody else. Pakistan is an extremely important country. However, from a US context at this time, in this administration, that long-term context is not something that will be in view of making the scenes. It will be CT, it will be nuclear issues. For CT first, and I'll take hardly 3 to 4 more minutes. In case of CT, we know the new pattern of US counterterrorism has been over-the-horizon action, which means drone strikes. I'll not be surprised at all if the problem stays and sustains, especially with the Islamic State of Khorasan, or potentially with Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan also. I'll come to that in a second. Or with any other resurgence of Al-Qaeda or Daesh in any other sector in Pakistan, Afghanistan, broader region, you may see a return of a level of some drone strikes. I should have mentioned this upfront early on. I speak on my personal behalf. These are my personal assessments and my personal opinions. So on CT, it might go to that level, or there will be a dialogue. Pakistan is already preparing at 3 different levels, the different task force. From next month, they will start engaging with Pakistan. I know for a fact that within Pakistan, there is a new added focus on CVE. The timeline is a bit different on US side. The word CVE has gone up in the air. Everything is CT now, not CVE. I personally prefer PVE, preventing counter extremism or countering violent extremism. And I know in Pakistan, there's broad support for it, and there's an institutional push for that, and rightly so, because of the sectarian and other extremist challenges in Pakistan. But from US side, on the CVE side, there may not be much I should say, collaboration or interest. It's pure hardcore CT. And that's where Pakistan is seen as capable of doing it. It was rightly mentioned, FATF, Pakistan had done quite well in that regard, also in pushing back some of the militant groups. But by and large, the view is when all those folks who profile Pakistani militant organizations, they are far, in US side, they are far more concerned about ISKP, Islamic State of Khorasan, and not on TTP to an extent. The reasons are clear, not that TTP is not seen as a major terrorist group. There used to be a strong collaboration between Pakistan and United States on TTP in 15 years ago or 10 years ago, when top TTP leadership was taken out by US drone strikes. Now, US has stepped back away from all things Afghanistan per se, or Taliban. So TTP is seen as a local group, and US would at this time would not like to get involved in a local militant group dynamics, because then that directly brings US as a target for some of these groups. So that's one important factor. There's a debate in the United States whether in the policy security sector, whether TTP is capable of becoming a regional or global terrorist group. If you ask me personally, what I have read about TTP narratives, I think their narratives are broader, but their attacks and their attack pattern and terrorism, what they are conducting today in Pakistan, is all very, very local in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province and in the broader one, Pakistan-Afghanistan region, at times in Karachi. But ISKP is what on top of the list for United States. So CT collaboration will mostly be in that area. And if that cooperation is strong, this will build a stronger relationship for the current scenario. The second topic, I know Ambassador Naqvi is here, and he's one of the most authentic voices to talk about nuclear issues. All what I'm referring to is from United States perspective, Pakistan is a strong nuclear state with 150 to 170 nuclear weapons, with the capability of tactical nuclear weapons as well. The old history of nuclear proliferation, which Pakistan would not like to hear much about it, but that's part of history. So that comes up automatically. I would encourage, this is totally personally my 2 cents on this. If I'm Pakistan, I would engage more with US on nuclear security issues. Rather than at some critical moment, this comes up, a continuous collaboration. Not necessarily, this doesn't mean this is meant to restrict Pakistan's any missile range or something else, though those concerns are there. A continuous engagement and track 2 or track 1.5, I should say, dialogue on nuclear issues, which is happening to the best of my knowledge a little bit. But a continuation of that dialogue will be another platform which will bring the US-Pakistan security collaboration in a stronger way. That's all that I had to, I could add to this excellent conversation. My other colleagues have talked about the US-India relationship and its dynamics. I think if I have to draw any lesson, which like Michael Kugelman, I'll say Pakistan has done quite well in making its case. I give a lot of credit being part of the Pakistani diaspora in the United States. I think Pakistani diaspora, although currently their focus is more on political issues at this moment, but that activity and that engagement of Pakistani diaspora in the political arena, activity and cooperation with congressional members has created a new platform and a new avenue for bringing both the US and Pakistan closer on many of these strategic issues. Hopefully, this diaspora activity will become broader in its focus, and we'll talk about more opportunities to bring the focus on this relationship. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to hearing other speakers and learning from them. Back to you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Professor Hassan Abbas, for a very objective assessment of where we are in terms of the state of relations, as well as giving a forward-looking perspective in terms of which would be the core issues or core areas of cooperation and interaction between the two countries. you had mentioned in particular like CT and of course the nuclear issue. And again, you had mentioned Ambassador Naqvi is probably the best expert to comment on that. So we will have, we'll be back to Islamabad now and have Ambassador Naqvi speak on sort of, that particular sort of area of relations, as well as sort of, whatever comments he would like to share in terms of the general tone and tenor of Pakistan-US relations, given his background of having worked in the Foreign Office on the US relations and his background of an expert in nuclear issues. So the floor is yours, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. One reason I like to stand and speak is because sitting there, my legs got quite numb, and it is an exercise to keep them active. So I prefer to stand. It's a pleasure to be here, and the subject is extremely interesting. I will make some quick comments about what I see as are the features of Trump thinking. Trump thinks about MAGA, Make America Great Again, and America First. He also wants to earn money for the US. That's how he talks about the tariff. And he's even today, yesterday, gave out that new executive order about tariffs on foreign films. So that's the other thing that he is thinking about most of the time. In foreign policy, and in the third domestic interest of his is immigration, to stop people from coming and to throw out those he can, who he thinks should not be in the US. So that is another feature of Trump think. In foreign policy, I think he believes in supporting the strong and discouraging the weak from standing up. That's what he is doing in Russia, Ukraine. That's what he is doing in Gaza. He is supporting the strong and preventing the weak from standing up. Now that is how he's going about it. So there are all these features of Trump think that we have to keep in mind. Very quickly, in South Asia, there have been talk of other people, and there have been the assessment of some very outstanding experts, both here in Islamabad and from the US. The US has a strategic partnership with India, and that is a given. That is something that is going to be there. But there seems to be an attitude of benign neglect of South Asia. There is this desire to see things go on well. Of course, what Hassan Abbas said regarding setting up a center of countering China. Sorry, that was and that is what concerns the US administration. But in this context of benign neglect, and then Trump's comments about, by the way, I must comment on that, about the fact that we have been at loggerheads for the last 1,000 or 1,500 years. I think he was thinking of Muslims and Hindus. He was not thinking of Kashmir. He was more, this was more in the context of 1,000 years and 1,500 years is in the context of Muslims and Hindus. And then he said that they will sort it out themselves. So benign neglect. Benign neglect is apparent in what he's now saying. But they will remain engaged. Marco Rubio's phone call to the Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif and to the Indian Foreign Minister is evidence of the fact that they want to keep engaged. On the nuclear issue, as my good friend Jawhar, and I must congratulate you on doing a very good job on setting up this very nice conference. On the nuclear, we have had a very long engagement with the US on this regard. When I was in Washington many years ago, the American position was to demand a rollback. This was in the early 90s, 91 to 96. I was deputy head of mission in Washington. And they all were saying, roll back, you must roll back. We did not. So we have maintained our own, the fissile material cutoff treaty. Robert Gallucci called me and said that you must support us. And we are going to the General Assembly to launch this new proposal. And even today, the FMCT is in the doldrums. We have managed to deal with the US on the nuclear issue. And now our forte is nuclear safety and security. We have the Pakistan Center of Excellence on Nuclear Security, where we have trainees coming from all over the world, including the US, for courses run by the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission on nuclear safety and security. So that will be something that will sell very well with the US, that will go very well with the US, because we are a very responsible nuclear power, and we feel that this is not something to be messed with. We have developed our deterrent capability, and we will maintain it. But loose talk about the nuclear issue is not very wise. It's not very prudent. In case, God forbid, if there is a nuclear exchange, I, having dealt with this for many years, I fear about the consequences where there will be a nuclear cloud over the entire atmosphere, not only of South Asia, but in the entire region or perhaps beyond, which will block sunlight, which will allow only the noxious gases to come down to the earth. It'll prevent vegetation, deform children who are born, and all kinds of very, very horrible consequences. So I don't think nuclear use should ever be considered, and it is a deterrent, and it is best kept like that. So I won't go on. Counterterrorism, I think, is going to be an important common point, convergence of our both two countries. And I think counterterrorism also, Pakistan is fully committed to dealing with terrorism. We have suffered the consequences of terrorism long enough. Others talk about Pakistan, terrorists in Pakistan. Pakistan is one country which has tried to deal with terrorism more effectively than has been witnessed anywhere else in the world. So we would be happy to work on this and get assistance in this regard from other countries. So I will stop there in my comments. Thank you, John.
Relevant comments, very succinct as well. Like Ambassador Naqvi said, the strong will do what they can and the weak will suffer what they must. That this quote, of course, from Thucydides, thousands of years ago, but still very much relevant in international relations, unfortunately. Ambassador, you had mentioned Robert Colucci, so I had a very interesting interaction with him once. I got to know him when I was a fellow at Georgetown University, part of the young faculty there. So I was auditing one of his classes one day, and he began the class by painting a scenario of there's been a dirty bomb attack in New York. And then he asked the class, what do you think could be the source of this dirty bomb? And then people kind of conjectured a bit. And then he said, if ever something like that happens, the source would be Pakistan. So of course I protested and everything, and then subsequently we became good friends. But I hope we are far from that type of suspicion in the early 2000s. Exactly. Okay, wonderful. So now we will have a keynote speaker for the session. And the chair of the session, Ambassador Jaleel Abbas Jalani. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Jawhar Salim, for this initiative. It's a great conference that has been organized by Institute of Regional Studies. And the kind of participation that I see here that testifies to the importance which is attached to this conference. I see my distinguished colleagues from the Diplomatic Corps. I see our colleagues, former ambassadors, colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I also see Dr. Shamshad Akhtar Sahiba, who was my cabinet colleague and who laid the foundation of a forward-looking economic policy during the interim period, during which we were both worked together very, very closely, and which is also producing great results now. I also see our very distinguished General Nasir Khan Janjua, the former National Security Advisor of Pakistan. Why I mention his name is that under his leadership, we entered into a discreet and candid anti-terrorism mechanism with India in 2015. And let me tell you that that mechanism produced great results. And in case the cooperation or that mechanism had continued, the kind of attack or the kind of apprehensions or trading of accusations that we see today between India and Pakistan, that would not be there. And we would have been moved and taken a long stride in addressing our respective concerns with regard to terrorism. But unfortunately, that terrorism came to an end because the Indian side reneged on their commitment. Since the topic is the Trump II administration and South Asia, so I will rather than sort of confining my remarks to India or Pakistan, I will try and sort of cover the entire South Asia in my remarks. We have to keep a number of factors in mind while discussing the Trump administration's or US policy towards South Asia. I think many of the speakers who came before me, they did an excellent job in sharing excellent observations with regard to Trump administration's orientation towards South Asian countries, particularly India and Pakistan. But I'll say that we have to keep the following factors in mind. Firstly, America's main interest during the Cold War was the containment of Soviet Union. You know, that's something that when we joined the Foreign Service, that's something that we witnessed. And that was the most prominent thing at that particular time. Pakistan readily joined that equation with the United States of America. And I think that equation also benefited both the US and Pakistan greatly in promoting and preserving our respective interests. Currently, how we see for the last several decades, particularly since the Clinton administration, since President Clinton's visit to India, we see the contours of the main US objective, which appears to be the containment of China. And many of the initiatives which have been taken in Asia, whether it is Indo-Pacific strategy, which was previously called Asia-Pacific strategy during the Obama administration, and subsequently it was changed to Indo-Pacific strategy. That is an important factor. The activation of Quad is another, an alliance of US, Australia, India, is again something that has become very, very active. And then we also see the emergence of I2U2, another alliance, which is India, Israel, United Arab Emirates, and the United States of America. Secondly, I think when you look at the main policy objectives in the last 110 days of the Trump administration, many of these things have already emerged on the scene, like advancement of the current administration strategy, the Abraham Accord. The Abraham Accord, which was signed during the previous Trump administration, we see a lot of movement taking place in that direction. We see a desire to bring an end to the Ukrainian war. This is again a very prominent American objective under the current administration. We also see the building of alliances, then trade objectives to negotiate the best possible trade deals favorable to the United States of America, which has also created a lot of anxiety, not only in the United States of America, but across the globe. So that's again, amen. But then China containment strategy, which as I mentioned earlier, started during the Clinton administration and got sort of momentum during the successive administrations, that will again remain at the center stage of the current administration. Thirdly, talking about South Asia, I think South Asia, we should have absolutely no doubt that India remains the center of attraction, as you know, when we talk about South Asia. I was in Oman a couple of months ago, attending a South Asia conference, discussing exactly the same topic that we are discussing today. And most of these South Asian countries who were represented there was a very strong perception amongst the South Asian countries that when it comes to US-South Asia relations, the bigger pie is always allocated to India. Almost 80 to 90% of the attention that is paid by the US administration that goes towards India, and only very small kind of interaction takes place with the other South Asian countries. That's one. Secondly, most of the other South Asian countries, their representative with whom, and this they also spoke during the conference, they thought that the US administration's policy to look at other South Asian countries through the Indian lens also creates a lot of difficulties for those countries, and it generates a sense of insecurity. The designation of India as the net security provider by the US administration, the previous US administration, adds to this perception. And then I think the kind of arrangement that the US has made with India, enhanced defense cooperation, technological cooperation, transfer of technology, logistic and intelligence arrangements with India. And all these factors basically they contribute to that perception that has been there in terms of trade. I think probably in recent years, the only point of friction which has developed between India and the United States has been on the trade issues. Because the US administration, particularly the Trump administration, they expressed publicly their concerns with regard to the tariff regime, the highest tariff regime which has been imposed by the Indian side, not only to the American imports, but also imports from the other countries. For instance, on Pakistan, a 200% import duty has been imposed since 2019, which for any standard or any WTO regulations will be considered as highly unjustified. What is the outcome of this perception in the South Asian countries with regard to the closer US-India cooperation? I think a number of things. One is that for the last several years, you see a degree of arrogance setting in the Indian policymakers vis-a-vis other South Asian countries. That is, again, something which is very pronounced, and then it is also generating a lot of reaction from the smaller South Asian countries, as we witnessed in Bangladesh. Same is the sentiment that is felt in Nepal, Sri Lanka, and other smaller countries. And then you also see an aggressive Indian behavior towards the other South Asian countries. Apart from the constant tension that has existed between Pakistan and India for the last many, many years, the smaller countries have also begun to feel that tension. And then one major impact of this closer Indian kind of cooperation with the US and the Western country has been the hardening of India's position on almost every issue, whether it pertains to Pakistan or other South Asian countries. With Pakistan, there was a time during the Cold War when India was not so close to the US or the West. India was still amenable to resolving conflicts with Pakistan bilaterally. And I refer to the Siachen Glacier agreement that was signed between late Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto and late Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi in 1989. And that is an agreement that was subsequently formalized by the defense secretaries of the two countries. But then, with the emergence of the new realities in South Asia, India began to renege on that commitment as well. Border issues. There was a time, again during the Cold War, when India was not so close to the Western alliance. You see resolution of some of the water issues between Pakistan and India bilaterally. And I am referring to Salal Dam. India started to build Salal Dam in 1978, which Pakistan thought was in violation of the Indus Waters Treaty. It was pointed out to the Indian side, and India modified the design of the Salal Dam. So that was the kind of, the environment at that particular time. Another project that India started, known as Vular Barrage, or the Turbal Navigational Project. When India started that construction on that dam in the 80s, Pakistan raised objections, saying that it violated the provisions of the Indus Waters Treaty, and India stopped the construction of that work. But in recent years, when you look at the situation, for the last several years, water, as you know, is the most important factor in Pakistan, being the lower riparian state. Our farmers, our poor people, they are dependent on the water that flows from the Indian side of Kashmir into Pakistan. So Baglihar, whether it was the Baglihar hydroelectric project, which glaringly violated the Indus Waters Treaty, or the Kishan Ganga project, which again is a gross violation of the Indus Waters Treaty, despite Pakistan's objections, they went ahead with the construction activity. Although currently there is a case pending with the International Court of Arbitration and the neutral experts, but then they have not really cared about the outcome of either the International Court of Arbitration or but they have completed the projects. Another project that is in the pipeline, or that on which work has started, is the Ratle projects. This suspension of Indus Waters Treaty by India, from our perspective, it constitutes the most glaring example of violation of international law. It's a violation of the treaty law. It is a violation of the bilateral agreements that we have with India. And it is also a great violation of the environmental laws that we were talking about in the previous session. And also, I think it does not behove a country like India to have acted in this manner, for the simple reason that Pakistan is not the only low riparian state. India itself is also a low riparian state. And it is in my reckoning, it is one of the most ill thought out Indian decisions that they have taken in recent times. Certainly this will be agitated by Pakistan at every forum. And I have absolutely no doubt that the entire world is going to condemn India for this violation that has taken place. Imagine a country which has global ambitions, a country which has regional ambitions, and a country which wants to become the permanent member of the UN Security Council, violating the international law, and doesn't really caring about anything, whether it's the treaty laws or the environmental laws are concerned. Obviously, Pakistan has asked them to give evidence of the attack, which has not been shared. The good thing is that the US administration has taken an extremely balanced view of the situation developing in the last 10 to 12 days. The statements which have been made by the American side, by the other European countries, they are also, or the Middle Eastern countries, they are also asking India to restrain. And in case they have any evidence of the attack, as Pakistan has asked for, they should share it with Pakistan and also with the with the other countries. What is the future? What is the kind of role that the United States of America can play in this tense environment? I think US has a very important role. One, as I mentioned, that US has adopted a very balanced posture vis-a-vis both Pakistan and India. It has, despite opposition coming from the Indian side in Washington, the American side released $375 million for the maintenance of F-16 aircraft. Their statement, President Trump's statement in the joint session of the American Congress was again something which was very, very important from our point of view. And also the kind of statement that has emerged from the American side after this Indian aggressive posture towards Pakistan, which I consider as very, very helpful. So what is the kind of role that America can play in the future? I was part of the negotiations or the peace process between Pakistan and India from 2003 to 2008. And I can tell you that the United States of America and the United Kingdom, they remained very, very closely involved with the entire process during the entire duration of the peace process that we followed. At every step, they would sort of, whenever the two countries would face a roadblock, they would come forward and help the two countries. I think similar role can be played by the US side in order to diffuse tension between our two countries. Pakistan has made several realistic proposals to the Indian side as part of our track 2 interaction. And obviously those were the proposals that we made to the Indian side. They enjoyed the blessings of the government, from our government. And these include one, the establishment of a back channel, revival of the dialogue process between our two countries to resolve all disputes and issues between our two countries, whether it is Kashmir dispute, whether it is Siachen Glacier dispute, whether it is Sir Creek, terrorism, or water issues between our two countries. That's something which is very important. Another very important thing, forward-looking approach, would be to revive all the confidence-building measures that were agreed upon between the two sides. But then, for that to happen, it is extremely important that the leadership demonstrates statesmanship of the kind that was demonstrated by the leadership of India and Pakistan in 2003, 2007. Why I say that in 2003, at the height of tension between Pakistan and India, I had just been declared persona non grata by the Indian side from where I was serving as head of mission. I had come to Pakistan, and after immediately after that, Prime Minister Vajpayee, he went to the Indian occupied Kashmir and made a public statement in which he mentioned that I would like to resolve the Kashmir dispute in accordance with Insaniyat, which is humanity, in accordance with Jamhuriyat, which is democracy, and in accordance with Kashmiriyat, which is according to the Kashmiri aspirations. So things began to move after that. And believe me that, we agreed on a ceasefire in September of 2003. And then the kind of process that we followed, it was one of the most forward-looking and result-oriented process that we both followed since 1947. And here, the helping hand from the United States of America would be of critical importance. the helping hand from the other European countries who also have a high weight as far as India is concerned. They have trade relations, they have strategic relations with India. So that would also be of significant importance. The Middle Eastern countries, they can also play a very, very important role. I think I was allotted 10 minutes by the president of Institute of Regional Studies, but I have gone much ahead of my 10 minutes allocated to me. But thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Ambassador Gilani, for a most enlightening, encompassing overview of the U.S. policy perspective on South Asia, even beyond India and Pakistan in the first phase, because there are many other countries in South Asia, and subsequently, of course, focusing on the India-Pakistan dynamics and how the U.S. foreign policy impacts that, and how the India-Pakistan dynamics impact their relations with the U.S., both sides. Very useful indeed, and I'm sure that for researchers will be a great store of ideas. Now we move to the Q&A session. I see two questions. Three. Yeah, we limit ourselves to three because of the paucity of time. So the first question is an interesting one. Okay. You see a transitional change in the US-Pakistan relations that is patron-client to strange-client relationship. What is the future prospect of the relationship? Okay, personally, I do not agree with any of these two terms. And I think the future of the relationship was very elaborately discussed by many of our speakers, some from the US, and of course, by Ambassador Naqvi as well, and in very detailed manner by Ambassador Gilani in his keynote speech. But suffice to say that, these were not patron-client relationships, and strange-client relationship is a term I think we'll be all unfamiliar with, so we do not really know what it stands for. Okay, we move to the next question. Why still South Asia region facing tensions and disputes, which is also blocking the development of SAARC? What process can be started or adopted to overcome these problems in the region? Well, so would you like to take this question?
Well, I still believe and very strongly believe that Pakistan-India relations are resolvable. Resolvable because there are no ideological orientation as far as these issues are concerned. These are political issues between Pakistan and India. And if the two countries follow international legality and they resolve these issues through a process of courage, boldness, and flexibility, I have absolutely no doubt that these issues can be resolved. My own very strong recommendation would be that we already have a structure available in the shape of understandings that had been developed between the two countries from 2003 to 2008. What is needed is to muster up enough courage mainly by the Indian leadership and pick up the threads from where we left in 2008, I think the issues can be very easily resolved. But then again, the kind of elements or the factors that I mentioned, courage of the leadership, statesmanship of the leadership, positive role by the media is also of significant importance because the media has been spoiling. Just imagine that after the Pahalgam, the first kind of shrill voices that we heard were from the Indian media because they were the ones who were creating a certain mood in India. So if they had not, if they had asked the right question from the Indian government about the evidence that the Indian side had, probably things would have been much different. And I think then the the role of the international community, as I mentioned, is also very, very important.
Thank you, sir, for the elaborate reply. I'm confident that the author of this question would find it very useful. Last question. US government has backed off several multilateral agreements. What would be the future of these agreements? Now, I assume that they are referring to the Paris Accord, and I think they also withdrawn from some UN agencies as well, WTO, and of course earlier on they withdrew from JCPOA, which they are renegotiating, trying to renegotiate.
Yeah.
So, sir, would you like to? Mr. Kugelman, if you're still there, would you like to respond to this?
Yes.
Okay. Virtual speakers, abhi koi hai aur? Any of the speakers who are with us virtually, would they like to respond to this?
Ambassador, I can briefly mention, if you can hear.
Mr. Abbas, Professor Abbas.
Sir, I can very briefly respond to, in terms of these major international treaties, I think many of these are being renegotiated. The purpose, to the best of my understanding, is not to walk out of those commitments. US is a global power with huge interests, trade, economic, political, security, and it's a consensus of sorts, I think, across various political power centers in US that US needs to engage, although even though the approach has changed. So you may see kind of renegotiations or new deals in that regard, but it's not necessarily walking out or giving up on these relationships. That's to the best of my knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on that by any of the panelists? Okay, the last question is from my side, actually. So any of this speakers or sort of, those present or those joining us virtually as well, do you see a Thucydides trap playing out inside South Asia in view of the developing US-China rivalry in the coming years?
I was in Singapore last year attending the Shangri-La Dialogue. And during the interaction, I met with many of our colleagues from the Asian countries, Indo-Pacific countries, so to say. And they were concerned about this rivalry that is being developed between the US and China. And one major fear in the minds of those senior diplomats was that they may not be confronted with a situation of either with us or with them. And as a matter of fact, one of someone from Indonesia asked this question from the American US Secretary of Defense. And his response was that no, that situation will never arise. So I'm sure that must have put at rest the kind of fears that had developed in the minds of many of the Asian countries. So we hope that there will be a rethink in terms of these policies. As far as Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan certainly, and so is the case with all the Asian countries. They would like to develop, and for that matter, the European countries, they would like to develop good economic relations with China. And at the same time, they would like to continue with the kind of partnership that they have developed with the United States.
Okay,
my sense well. Let's not overlook the fact.
let's not overlook the fact that President Trump is a businessman who likes to make deals. So I think even this US-China confrontation is, when reduced to business terms, may see some kind of a modus vivendi, if not a conciliation. And therefore, in that context, South Asia and what happens here will not be a Thucydides trap, because here also Trump will realize that the countries in question are not going to completely disengage with China. And once he realizes that, I think there will be some kind of modus vivendi. So that's my analysis of it.
Thank you. Any other panelists would like to add to that? Wonderful. Well, I'd like to, I think, thank all the panelists, those who are here in person, and the ones who joined us virtually from the US. I think we had an excellent session with various shades of opinion being expressed. And the way we sort of, contrasted the US perspective with the Pakistan perspective, so to get to highlight the sort of, the feelings on both sides, the priorities on both sides, and the interests on both sides. Ultimately, any relationship, and the topic, of course, was not just Pakistan, US, it was US, South Asia. Ultimately, it depends on a confluence of divergence of interest. That is how international relations plays out. We all know that. But the fact is always there. There could be commonalities of culture or sometimes ethnicities or historical associations. But those are minor factors. The major and primary factor always is the confluence or divergence of interest. So I think we have panned out how the relations will evolve in the coming years as against what is the state of affairs presently. And of course, the past was mentioned as well. Sometimes we get emotional. We've seen these perspectives from Pakistan sometimes, there's a feeling of betrayal. From the US side as well, sometimes you see the feeling that Pakistan has not been as loyal, perhaps, from their perspective. But I think the relations between countries at the end of the day are not based on emotions or individual perceptions. They are based, as I said, on interest. And to a certain extent, they are transactional, whether we like it or not. This is a topic of great importance and interest, and we will continue to have more discussions on this. I would like to now request you to join me in a big hand of applause for all our eminent speakers today. And I may mention that Ambassador Gilani was planning a trip. I mean, he's still would be leaving for that trip, but because of this session, he actually changed some of the dates. So we really appreciate that, Ambassador Gilani. Thank you.
And before we conclude, I would invite our panelists for a group photo of the session, followed by the distribution of shields. Shilani. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our session and of day one. We invite you all for high tea. Thank you for being with us.